Eugene, great to see you, man. I've been looking forward to this interview for a while because when it comes to these accusations of Israel perpetrating war crimes and being an occupier, etc., there's no one better than you in refuting those claims. Number one, this young lady in Toronto, anti-Israel demonstrator, accused Israel of war crimes, and we're hearing that charge more and more. Could you lay out for our viewers how Israel is perhaps the most humane fighting force, I would argue, in human history?
Yeah, exactly. Despite, thank you. It's great to be talking to you. And I have to say, despite the horrible massacre, the atrocious attempted genocide that Hamas perpetrated, Israel has reacted with what I can only describe as restraint. And I would just ask your viewers to think if something on the order of 5 9/11s in one day, along with the horrible brutality, people tortured to death, happened in America, what would the United States do? I can tell you what Israel is doing. Israel is abiding purely by the laws of war. And the laws of war say you can only attack targets with military value, military targets. But when you attack those targets, one of the tragedies of war is that it is possible that civilians may get hurt. And civilian casualties, if they're not the goal of the attack, if they're incidental to the attack, are permissible. Indeed, nobody has ever fought a war without civilian casualties. When the United States fought to remove ISIS from Syria, there were maybe 10,000 casualties in that campaign. And again, that was not a threat right next door that had just invaded the United States. So Israel only targets military targets. But Hamas specifically locates, like in the footage you're seeing now, it specifically locates its military targets, not on a base, not separate from the civilian population, but amidst and even underneath the civilian population. Now, under the international law of war, that is a war crime. That is failing to observe what is called the requirement of distinction. But simply because Hamas hides amongst civilian population does not immunize them from attack. That would encourage terror groups to hide amongst civilians. When Hamas puts tunnels, for example, underneath hospitals, underneath city blocks, those tunnels remain valid military targets, and the moral culpability for those civilian casualties lies fully on Hamas.
That's a great point, Eugene. Look, as you mentioned, Hamas is willfully using civilians as human shields, and yet we hear calls for Israel continuously to preserve, obviously, civilian lives in Gaza. The world seems to be laying responsibility for the civilians of Gaza at the feet of the Israel Defense Forces. But who is ultimately responsible for the civilians in Gaza right now?
Hamas is responsible for the civilian of Gaza because they are the government. They have chosen to create a political entity in the 17 years since Israel left, where all the fuel, all the resources goes to their genocidal terror tunnel network. I think a simple illustration of the difference between Israel and Gaza is in Israel, underneath all the hospitals, is where they put the neonatal units, the surgery units, the special underground bunkers for those procedures for vulnerable people, so they can be safe when Hamas shoots rockets at the hospitals. Underneath a Hamas hospital, a Gazan hospital, is the Hamas bunker for Hamas terrorists to get Israel to target those hospitals. And I would say that when Hamas puts a bunker under a hospital, when it puts its headquarters under a hospital, which it is doing, those hospitals become legitimate military targets. Now, Israel has refrained from attacking those so far, in part because of international pressure. But there are things which Israel could be doing, which it's unfortunately, I think, not doing because both of foreign pressure and even pressure by internal bureaucratic forces and government lawyers who are afraid of some of the international repercussions.
Yeah, it's almost like Israel at times, Eugene, is fighting with one hand tied behind its back, sadly. Hey, you're a renowned expert on international law. We've got about a minute left, and we will have you back to break this down more, Eugene. But quick question, what do you make, and you deal with this all the time head on, what do you make of the world's obsession with Israel? I mean, an anti-Israel obsession, I should say, and the so-called legal basis for it?
So there's absolutely no legal basis for it. international law is completely inverted when it comes to Israel. That is to say, the standards that are used for Israel are simply not the standards used for other Western countries. We know that America in Iraq attacked hospitals. In Afghanistan, there was bombing of hospitals. America blew up terror tunnels even when they were under civilian areas. That's what international law allows. Instead, there's a law made simply for the Jewish state, and that's not international and it's not law. It is an attempt to prevent the Jewish state from defending itself from genocide.
Yeah, Israel held to impossible standards, Eugene, and you do such a great job of refuting these lies and the charges against the
Thank you.
world's one and only Jewish state. Eugene Kontrovich, thanks so much. We will see you again soon. Thanks for your insights.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Folks, that is a very, very important point, and several points made by Eugene refuting this. We have obviously the military sphere of Israel's war and battles right now, but the war of ideas, the ideological war is being waged right now as well. And Israel needs ammo there too in the intellectual realm, and Eugene supplies that big time. Hey, final thoughts